I started having a lot of thoughts of myself that were untrue. Um, and I knew it, but you still start playing that tape in your mind sometimes that somehow I had caused it, that I was almost like I viewed myself as a neglectful mother, that I didn't have a body that could take care of my babies anymore. And so much of my identity had been wrapped up in being a good mom, um, and in having these beautiful living children and a big family, and I can birth babies, and so all of this pride and puffed up identity just came crashing down, that was over.
Are you walking through a storm that feels like it will never end? Do you wonder if life's storms have stolen the beauty from your life for good? You're in the right place. My name is Heather, and like you, I've been through a storm or two and wondered if life would ever be beautiful again. Here we share warriors' words, stories of discovering beauty after battles, and the worth in your wounds. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words. Welcome, warriors. Jocelyn Abyad is the wife of Father Ziad Abyad and the mother of 7 daughters on earth and 3 babies in heaven. She holds a degree in psychology from Arizona State University and worked as a finance banker for over a decade before choosing to stay home to raise her children. Alongside her husband, she serves at St. John of the Desert Melkite Catholic Church in Phoenix, Arizona, where she is blessed to be close to family and longtime friends. Jocelyn shares insights on homeschooling and liturgical living across multiple platforms as Melkite Mama and is a regular contributor to Busy Kids magazine. In 2024, she co-founded We Carry You Still, a nonprofit ministry offering support to women and families who have experienced miscarriage or infant loss. Through her work and personal experiences, Jocelyn's mission is to uplift and support those navigating grief while nurturing faith and community. But before we hear Jocelyn's story, here is a review from Lacey W. I'm sorry, that's Lacey L. My apologies, Lacey. Real life and so encouraging. In her intro, she says you're going to laugh and cry, and you are, but in such a good way. What an encouragement, and so good to know those of us who have been through trauma. I remember my husband walking through his second diagnosis with leukemia, getting ready to walk into a stem cell transplant and searching for transplant survivors to connect with, because it is so comforting to walk through traumatic life situations if someone has gone before us and can stand and say, it is okay. That's what this podcast does. It offers a place to be comforted. I can't recommend it enough. Okay, this one brought tears. Thank you so much, Lacey, for encouraging me and encouraging other listeners to find that place of comfort. I truly appreciate you sharing about your husband, and I pray things are better for both of you now. Would you like me to read your review on an upcoming episode? Go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for the show. Who knows? I just might read your review next. And then after you leave your review, come and join us in the Warrior Words Facebook community at facebook.com/groups/warrior words. After you hit request, please answer the questions that pop up, and I look forward to getting to know you in there. So grab a tissue and join Jocelyn and me as we talk about the impact of infertility and infant loss and miscarriage and how important it is to share and talk about these experiences. Let's rock. Hi, everyone. I would like to welcome Jocelyn to the Warrior Words podcast. We are so happy to have you here today, Jocelyn.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here and be able to share our story.
Well, I'm looking forward to that too. And normally we start with the backstory or the reason, but since I've already shared your bio with the listeners, we all know that you have started a foundation called the We Carry You Still. And so that's where I'd like to start. What is this foundation and why did it get started?
Yeah. So We Carry You Still is a nonprofit here in Arizona, and we were founded with the goal of supporting women and families who are experiencing miscarriage or infant loss, particularly through the lens of the Catholic and Orthodox faith. So we have an ecumenical aspect. We look at the beliefs of the Catholic and Orthodox Church that we have in common, the apostolic teaching of the church, and how we can come and support women through one of the most traumatic and difficult experiences we can go through as women, the loss of your child. And so it really was a ministry that was birthed out of my own loss of children. And now we are up and running. We have three arms of our ministry. The first that would be valuable to anyone, no matter where you are, is our website, which is wecarryyousstill.org. And on there, we have all of the practical, emotional, um, spiritual resources that one might need when they are experiencing a miscarriage or need help in healing afterwards. And then here locally, we have memory boxes. So we have something physical to give to the women who are in need and who are suffering, whether they request that for themselves or a friend requests it. The friend can pick up the box and give it to their friend. So we try and keep that aspect of the ministry very personal and hand to hand. And then our last aspect that we're actually still developing and we're really excited about, we're going to host a day of healing. So we're going to have retreat events. And our first retreat will be coming up this October. So that's in development now. So our ministry is new and about a year now that we've been operating and still just growing all of those resources.
Wonderful. And I love the hand that you said hand to hand, that that connection, and the retreat will do that as
Yeah.
well, just even at a different level.
Yeah. As I mentioned, this really is birthed out of my own experience, and so maybe I can just share with everyone
Yes.
what that happened, and then it connects into what we're doing now. It's all very much related. Um, because I don't think that there's anything I've ever experienced that's more intimate and personal than miscarriage. Um, so, um, if I rewind a little bit, I actually
Absolutely.
have,
Yes.
s- at that point in time, this was in 2020, I had six living children, and had six very normal, births, normal pregnancies, healthy babies, and everything had been very easy. And I really took my Catholic faith to heart to be open to life. And that was something that was important to us. And I never imagined that miscarriage or would be part of my story. Um, I really just felt like that was something that happened to other women. And fast forward, I really think the conversation around fertility really needs to change in our culture, and particularly in our faith. But at the time, we had another positive pregnancy test right about 2 years after our last baby, which was pretty typical for us. And we were overjoyed. Um, I'm sure no one has forgotten the quarantines, but at the time it was kind of the peak of the quarantine. So my whole family was home and we would go on walks together and we were all very excited about this baby. And I very clearly remember like taking a picture of my shadow, like of my profile on one of these walks, and just really enjoying the idea of being pregnant again and looking forward to this baby. And so when I went to my first OB appointment for that pregnancy, we had an ultrasound done and the baby's heart was beating, and I was about 9 weeks along at that point, and I thought everything was fine, but my OB did not. And God bless her, she really is an angel through this whole story. She's an amazing woman. But she said, the baby looks a little small, and so I'm concerned. I need you to come back next week. And that was really just blindsided me. It was, again, just not something that I expected or anticipated. It happened to be Holy Week. And so we spent that week, praying through the cross, praying through all of the beautiful prayers. We are Eastern Catholic, and so there's a prayer service for every night of Holy Week that is really in depth and beautiful. And so um, I really treasured that week and tried to hold on to hope that this baby was going to be okay. And at the same time, try and wrap my brain around the idea that she may not be. So when I went the next week, another really cruel aspect of this experience was, again, because of the quarantines, no one was allowed to go with me. And so I had to go alone to this appointment to find out whether or not my baby was alive. Um, and no one wanted to babysit, during those times either. So my husband stayed home, and one of my best friend stayed in the parking lot outside the medical office, which really was such a blessing. And Lindsay is one of my co-founders of the ministry, and really through this has taught me so much of how to show up and how to help people grieve. She has a real gift for that. Um, so I went in, we did the ultrasound, and again, it was a new experience, something I'd never expected or felt before. It was a silent ultrasound. And it's a really terrible thing to hear nothing, especially when you know better at this point. I wasn't ignorant of what a normal ultrasound looked like or felt like or sounded like. So we confirmed that the baby had died, and I was obviously devastated. But at that moment, I was also suddenly overwhelmed with this um, fear of the unknown and what was going to happen next. I, again, out of my ignorance, imagined that miscarriages, you suddenly start to bleed and the baby, goes. But have since then learned that's actually very rare, especially in today's day and age. Most women have a no heartbeat ultrasound and then pass the baby at a later time. And there's different ways that that can happen. So again, I'm now faced with all these choices, and I was horrified at the idea that I would flush my baby down the toilet. And that was really foremost in my mind, was how is this going to happen? And so I had a lot of questions for the doctor, and she was amazing. It really helped me through them, helped me with the practical aspects of what was going to happen. And we chose to miscarry at home. Um, so I came home knowing that my baby would be born in the next couple of days. I chose to take a medication to help that happen. There's lots of different choices that women can make. Um, but we did that. It was surreal. My kids watched TV just to be distracted while my husband and I dealt with that. It's like a terrible period or a mild labor somewhere in there, but with the heartache of knowing that there's nothing happy on the other end of that pain. And so she was born uneventfully. We'll just describe it as that. It was clear to me her body versus something that wasn't her body. And for me, that was healing because we did get to hold her, and we had ordered a container and a coffin for her as well. Because again, I was thrown into this world of how do you bury your baby? What do I do? I had to call the cemetery and ask questions like, am I allowed to bring a baby from home? I mean, just things that I had no idea I needed to know, that I then had to learn when I was in terrible grief. So it was really difficult to make those choices and find that information when I was already emotionally not in a great place. So that was our first loss, and we didn't get any answers, more like sometimes this happens, and um, kind of dismissed it. And I I really grieved that loss. We did bury our baby. No one was allowed at the cemetery except our immediate family and the priest. So again, it was that quarantine layering trauma, which I talked to other girlfriends and things like that. Everything medical during that time just adds a layer of trauma because of all the strangeness that was around that time period. Um, but we did bury her, and the funeral was beautiful. And I was glad that I had the opportunity to bury her. That was very healing. But again, we didn't have any answers. Um, and in a lot of ways, we were able to come to some peace that this was a fluke and unlikely to happen again. And, we would be okay. So in September of that year, we found out we were pregnant again, and we were very joyful. And I was trying to, I think in my mind, like put on a really brave face, like imagine that I wasn't carrying any sadness from the first loss anymore and embrace this baby right away. And so even though we were only like 5 weeks, when you first find out, we just told all of our family and we really tried to celebrate this baby. But um, I didn't have a lot of like the strong symptoms that you usually have when you're pregnant. I didn't have a good feeling in my heart, and I lost that baby at 6 weeks as well. So as soon as he came, he was gone. And that time, it really was more just like a period. There was no like body that we ever found or anything like that. And so that added a layer of guilt. Um, and strange disconnect, and a lot of fear that at this point I had just turned 41 and that my body was just too old. And I started having a lot of thoughts of myself that were untrue. Um, and I knew it, but you still start playing that tape in your mind sometimes that somehow I had caused it, that I was almost like I viewed myself as a neglectful mother, that I didn't have a body that could take care of my babies anymore. And so much of my identity had been wrapped up in being a good mom, um, and in having these beautiful living children and a big family, and I can birth babies, and so all of this pride and puffed up identity just came crashing down, that was over. And what does the end of your fertility look like? And maybe um, some of the women that are listening can understand that too, like coming to this end of your fertile years. I don't think anybody really warns you what that's like either. Um, because babies are just so put down in our society as like a trap. And so when babies are your joy and that period of your life is coming to an end, that's a difficult thing to grapple with, I think, even in the most healthy and positive circumstances. Um, but so shortly after that, we found out we were pregnant again over the holidays. So over Thanksgiving and Christmas, we found out we were expecting again. I was full of trepidation. I was so anxious. I was not joyful at all. Every time I would go to the bathroom, I would be looking for blood. Every time I felt a twinge, I was sure that this was the end. Um, and because we had had two previous losses, the doctors were really great. We had more checkups than usual. We did a full genetic workup and extra ultrasounds, and this baby was growing and thriving by all indications. In fact, I was looking through my journal during the time, just to kind of bring everything fresh to my mind before talking to you today. And I had forgotten one of his first ultrasounds where my husband was able to come. He had like leapt across the screen, and we were like, oh my gosh, this baby is just bouncing. And we also, because we had done the genetic testing, it's really cool. They can tell you very early what gender you're having. So we knew that this baby was a boy for sure, which was obviously a big change for our family as well. Because I only have girls, living girls. So all of my children that I have with me are girls. So we were going to have a boy. And we got all the way to 15 weeks. And That week, another friend of mine was pregnant and she had mentioned feeling the baby move. And all of a sudden, I just got sick to my stomach and I realized that I hadn't felt the baby move. And I tried to just minimize that, but it really just sent my anxiety through the roof. And so by the time I got to my checkup that week, my pressure was really high, and I just started crying. And I told the doctor, I'm really worried. And so even though I wasn't scheduled for an ultrasound, she was like, let's get you in here. She's amazing. Her name's Dr. Brodsky. I really am so grateful to her. But so she got out the ultrasound, and again, um, I know what I should see. And I told her, I said, I don't see a heartbeat. And she said, I don't either. And so I knew that this baby had passed away as well. And I was alone because we were so far along and we thought that all the danger was past. So she called my husband, and he met me right at home. And then we had to tell our other children that the baby had died, and they cried so hard. And that was just like, wound on top of wound, um, to just comfort them when I had no comfort to offer. Um, and so again, we just faced the reality of having to figure out how we were going to do this. So you have all of the emotional, terrible things, but you also have very practical things. So when you're that far along, you have to deliver in the hospital because it's a more dangerous time to lose a baby. So this time I had to navigate the hospital system, and I was told that they wouldn't let me take the baby home, that I would have to hire a mortuary if I wanted to bury the baby. I was given a lot of misinformation, and because it's I'm very stubborn, but I also it's interesting when your baby dies, there's very little that you get to do for them. And I found this like mama bear type of energy or fierceness within me that I was going to protect my baby. And it's very difficult to leave your baby somewhere you can't follow. And that that became my motivation to put, the emotional aspects kind of on the back burner and become a very practical place. And so I was like Googling my rights and hospital policy and making all of these phone calls. And I was able to find out that in Arizona, and the laws are different in every state, you are allowed to bring your baby home. So that they can be buried. So you don't have to submit to all these other things that I was being told I did. So I went into the hospital honestly with almost an antagonistic mindset, like that came from this like protective, fierce place. And I feel very grateful because the first nurse that we got, rather than talking to like hospital staff, I think who were like just more corporate and didn't actually understand the reality of what it's like to minister to a woman who's losing her baby, the nurse was incredible and assured me that all of my rights would, or, all my requests would be respected. And so that kind of put me at ease. I remember that I asked them to do one more ultrasound, that we would just make sure that they weren't wrong and that there wasn't some chance that we were going to have a Lazarus moment, that he would come back to life. And he hadn't. And so we went through the induction process and he was born that morning. And I think the thing that surprised me the most is how beautiful he was. Um, he really was perfect. And I think that's one thing that still kind of makes me sad is nobody really wants to see your baby that you miscarried. But um, he was perfect. You could see his fingernails and his toes, and he really looked like his dad. And perfect ears and perfect nose. And we got to hold him and spend the day with him, and pray. And then we brought him home. Um, we had to. be interviewed by social workers who thought we were crazy, but in my mind, this was the best thing that I could do for my son because I knew he wouldn't be in someplace alone without me. I would be taking care of him until he could be laid to rest. And for me, that was important. Um, so we brought him home and we put him in a saline bath. And I share this because this is something I would like other women to know and have the opportunity to do is babies born early are meant to be in water. And so once they're taken out of water, they kind of deflate and they don't look as nice. But if you are able to put them back in a saline bath in a clear container, they plump right back up. And it's really incredible. Um, and so my other children wanted to see him, um, all except my oldest. So my husband and I allowed them to hold him in his container because their skin's too fragile, but allowed them to process that. My oldest daughter at the time was 17. She did not want to. We allowed her to pick that um, for herself. And he stayed with us until the funeral, which was about 6 days later, where he was laid to rest next to his sister. And on his gravestone, we were able to put a Bible verse that for me represented the baby that we lost in September the year before. So for me, all three of them are buried there at the cemetery. Um, and at this point, I I felt probably numb in a lot of ways because when your baby dies, there's no baby to feed, there's no like diapers to change. And so life just it's almost as if the baby just disappeared. Like there's just this vacancy. And so we homeschool, so we just kind of got back to work. But um, in my mind, I really started having a lot of fear. So all of those feelings about being an inadequate mom started expanding, and I had these unreasonable fears that my other children were going to die, or that I wasn't going to be able to take care of them. And I stopped being able to take them to the park because I couldn't control every aspect of that situation. And it just became this, I couldn't sleep at night. It, instead of sadness, all of my feelings, all my grief was expressing itself in fear and anxiety in places where I knew I was being unreasonable. Like I could look at my behavior and be like, Jocelyn, you are not being reasonable right now. And yet I couldn't help the way that I was feeling. And I called Lindsay again one morning. We were supposed to go to a birthday party and I was just sobbing. I was like, I can't take them to the birthday party. And so I knew at that point I just really needed to seek additional help. And so I found a Catholic therapist who specializes in a type of therapy called EMDR. Well, a version of it, but the specifics don't matter. The bottom line is that it's a very short-term intensive therapy to deal with traumatic experiences. And what I found is that through about 6 sessions with her, I was really just able to process what had happened to me, you know, this news of my children being dead um, and and come to a place of healing and peace that I could keep living when my babies had not. Um, and it was a very, you know, definitive time of, I would say, about 6 months where I was really handicapped by these emotions and these feelings and couldn't function the way that I normally would. Um, and so that was incredibly healing um, to kind of start making that turn. And then, you know, then we start leading into the happy part, into the part where we can thrive again. But that's that's the story of why We Carry You Still came to be, because I lost my children. I wanted something better for other women than what I had experienced. And I think that it's wrong that we don't at least give women the idea that if you're open to life, you're inherently open to death, and that miscarriage is far more common than we talk about. particularly in our time, there's a lot of statistics saying it's becoming more common, um, even in the last few years. Women are waiting longer to have babies. It is more common as you get older, layered on top of a lot of different things. But I wanted better for other people than what had happened to me, and to make available the resources that are the most healing to other women so they don't have to research it the way I did when I was in that grief.
And what struck me as you were explaining each horrific incident with your children, is that you had three very different experiences, and you had to do research each time to figure out how to handle each different experience. And while that was horrible for you to have to do, that gave you the background and the information and the weapons, if you will, to be able to serve so many other women, because you have been there and you have experienced each of those types of trials and can really relate to what just about any woman losing her baby would experience.
So, what was really powerful about that is, and I am grateful that I can share these, weapons essentially with other women, but it was powerful for me in that moment, and because the things that I was researching, the things that I was able to do, and coming back to that point, when your baby dies so young, you don't get to change their diaper, you don't get to nurse them, you don't get to do all of these things that you expect to do for your baby, teach them things as they get older. You get to name them and you get to bury them. You get to preserve their dignity, and give them that dignified death, that we all deserve, right? We talk about having a good death, but we want that for everyone that we love, and that includes our children. And so for me, I think it's really important that people, including myself, were given the option to know they had choices in what that looked like. They had choices in what a good death might be, for their child.
I think choices are the most powerful weapons, because if you don't know what your options are, like you said, the hospital was giving you misinformation and telling you you had to leave your son at the hospital.
Yeah.
And if you hadn't done that research, you wouldn't have known that you were able to take him home and give him the proper burial. And even on top of that, give your other children a chance to meet their brother.
Yeah. I don't think people give children, um, enough credit for how simple their faith can be, and how much they can process. I think in our culture, we have been trained to not take kids to funerals, to hide death from them because it's hard, and to keep them completely separate. And, my children have a unique experience in that their siblings have died, and they were old enough to understand, that I was having a miscarriage more than once. Um, so they've had that experience. And like I said, the night that we had to tell them our son had died, it was really terrible. I mean, they really were so devastated. But at the same time, holding him and burying him, they they love to talk about their siblings. If we get a lot of comments, of course, because I guess I could fast forward. There's another part of the story that we do have one more living child after all of these losses, which was its own adventure in and of itself. But so I'll go out with 7 girls in tow. So of course we're quite the spectacle. But if someone says, "Oh, you only have girls," they'll correct them and say, "No, our brothers are in heaven." And so they have this very beautiful, simple faith that, that they are in heaven. And my husband is a Catholic priest. Yes, there are married Catholic priests. That's a whole nother thing. But through that ministry, they also do have the opportunity to go to more funerals, I think, than a lot of children necessarily would, because we're serving our community. And And I think that children bring light to these really sad events. And I think they can be respectful and they can appreciate the loss that's experienced. And I think they bring great comfort to us in their simple faith and in their joy. Um, and so far from being like traumatic, I actually think that my children grew from this experience and from being able to grieve their sibling. Um, we talk about how we thrive, but I see that my children have been able to thrive um, by having brothers and sisters in heaven.
Well, I love that. I love that they stand up for their brothers.
Oh, they do. They do. They do. Yeah.
And yes, and they acknowledge the fact that they do have three other siblings, and
Yeah.
that's beautiful. It's precious. And I usually like to ask about beauty, and I think that, I mean, obviously the foundation is beautiful, but the reaction of your children, your daughters, to their siblings, and they're fiercely protective, is what it sounds like, and I
Oh,
love
they
that.
are.
I love
They are.
that.
And they are a big part of the reason too for the ministry, because our Catholic faith gives us this beautiful foundation, this beautiful theology that our life is eternal, right? And so if we actually hold on to that, then my children know we have the confidence we're going to meet these babies someday. We're going to know them. Um, and when you talk about beauty from the ashes, from the terrible thing that you've gone through, I long for heaven now in a way that I never did before. And God forgive me for it, right? We should long for heaven because we'll be with God. But I think from a mother's heart, we can understand that I long to be with them. And I do feel separated from them right now, but it does make me look forward to and anticipate that time when we'll be reunited as well. And so when I speak about miscarriage and infant loss, I really love being able to speak from our Catholic faith and from this concept that we don't have like angels floating away somewhere. We have little saints in heaven. We have souls that are waiting for us that had bodies. Our human experience in our faith, body and soul is important. And so while we don't understand all of God's ways now, we know that He made us with a body and a soul for a reason. And I take great confidence that someday we will be able to hold each other in a way that we didn't get to here.
Beautiful. I do want to, this may seem like a weird tangent, but I do want to take a step back,
Yes.
because I have Christian, most of my listeners are Christian women. I
Yeah.
don't know the percentage of Catholic versus non-Catholic, but you
Yeah.
mentioned being married to a priest, which I think
Yeah.
both our Catholic sisters and our non-Catholic sisters might have raised an eyebrow to that. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe not as many Catholics, because there are a few ways that priests can be married in the church today. So could you give us a brief explanation of why you are married
Yes.
to a priest?
Yes. It's a very common question, and I do always tease. Yes, I'm married to a priest. No, we're not heretics. Um, but basically, I myself grew up Roman Catholic, and I had no idea that the Catholic Church is actually comprised of 24 churches. And so the Roman Catholic Church just happens to be the largest one. So 95% of Catholics are Roman Catholic. The other 5% are divided between these other 23 churches. I am Melkite Catholic, but there's Ukrainian, Ruthenian, Syro-Malabar, Syro-Malkar. There's lots. You can look them up. But basically, when the church was one, so back in the beginning, when Christ founded the church, there were East and West spirituality essentially that developed. And so we are the remnants of those that have the Eastern faith, which is predominantly like Orthodox right now. People think about Greek Orthodox or Antiochian Orthodox. Those are the churches that express the Eastern faith, the ancient faith. We are those that hold that faith, but are remain in communion with the Pope. So Orthodox and Catholic churches have very similar theology. We'll leave that debate to the theologians, but let us just say we have a lot in common. Um, and I personally am inclined to think it's far less that we differ in than anybody wants to say. And so I look to those things that we have in common. But in the East, the married priesthood was always retained. And so in the West, they have a celibate priesthood. Ironically, I grew up with a married priest. As you mentioned, he was an Anglican convert. So he had already been married and became a Roman Catholic priest. And so I've always had a married priest in my life. But again, grew up not familiar with the Eastern Catholic churches at all until I met my husband. And then I was sure he was a heretic and had to learn the phrase, you're right, dear, very early on in our relationship. And so here we are. So I like to think very simply East and West of like a quarter. We have the same faith and the same theology, but we express it differently. Just like heads and tails look different, it's still 25 cents. Those are the two sides of the church, and they're both valid and fully Catholic, fully in communion with the church. But we do have different traditions.
Excuse me. Thank you for that. Because I think it's helpful to, just like you said, you grew up Roman Catholic and didn't know that there were these other churches that were also Catholic. And so I
Yes.
think it's very helpful for our other both Catholic and non-Catholic sisters to uh
Yeah.
to learn. It's not,
Yes.
you're never too old to learn. It's always a good thing. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
so we've talked about beauty and we've talked about thriving. And so I guess I would like to just give you a little bit, a little bit more space to share how your foundation is growing. And well, you already said where we can find you, so I'll make sure I'll get that link in the show notes. And
Yes.
if there's anything else that you'd like to say about We Carry You Still. Actually, the thing that you mentioned very early on in this conversation is that we don't talk about this enough. And so I think that is one of the beautiful things about your organization. And, it gives us a space to talk about it. It gives women a chance to grieve and learn and express in a healthy way. And um, so if there, I guess it's kind of a roundabout way of asking
Yeah.
if you could share a little bit more about maybe why we need to talk about this and how we can do a better job if we're not in Arizona and can't and can't, because I know it's not stay, you don't necessarily want to stay in Arizona forever. That there may be, God willing, Holy Spirit inspired, um, you know chances to expand. But for right now, if they're not in Arizona, how
Yeah.
can, yeah.
Yeah. I think, to your point, for me, this is a pro-life issue. So a lot of times, people want to pray about abortion or euthanasia, but I think at the same time, we have a lot of faithful families who are grieving and suffering in silence, and not given tools when they were open to life. And so I think that all of us can do a better job of really incorporating this in our pro-life mentality that we want to support life from all stages. That burying the dead is a corporal work of mercy that we value, and that includes our youngest members of society. And so it's very much a part of We Carry Still's mission just to bring light to this subject. And that's why I say, our first line of defense really is our website. It's available to anyone, anywhere. There's a lot of beautiful resources on there, like I said, both practical and spiritual, emotional. So really everything that you would need. And we've been very careful on there to be sincere and authentic to church teaching, which is very important to us. So every single link that's on there, I have personally verified every book recommendation. And since we spoke about it a lot, I even have book recommendations for children, so siblings. So it's really this context. It's not just the woman that suffers, it's the whole family. We have informational guides on there that anyone can print, whether you're a friend, you're a grandma, you're the mother, you're the father, you're a parent with other children, of what to say, what not to say, gift ideas to bring comfort to a person who's experiencing miscarriage. So it is very much an integrated community experience because we want a whole community to be able to come alive around this family because it is a family who's suffering. My husband suffered in his own unique way. I suffered, my children suffered, and we all needed, respect and support in different ways. And so, no matter what role you play in there, I really recommend the informational guides that we have. They're free and you can take a look at them and provide comfort and support to anyone that you know. Um, and then, yeah, if you are in Arizona, we do have those memory boxes, and we encourage people to request them and to give them their beautiful something physical that you can show up and do because it is hard. We don't know what to say. And the truth is, you can't fix this. You can't make it better.
Right.
You can't bring their baby back to life, but you can walk next to them and you can acknowledge them. And I think I would just ensure everyone that by bringing up their baby, you're not making them more sad. We haven't forgotten that we lost our baby. And in fact, we're more afraid that everyone's forgotten them. And so when we acknowledge this loss, when we say your baby's names, when people remember Eden and Thomas and James, that brings me joy because it means that they were important beyond my little tiny experience, that they're remembered by other people. And so is really what the ministry is about, is making these memories um, last more than a moment, bringing actual comfort to people who are truly hurting.
I want to thank you for bringing up the family. You mentioned your husband grieving, and we could probably do a whole episode on that too, because I think we don't talk about miscarriage and infant loss enough from the point of view of the mother, but even less about from the point of view of the father. And maybe we might want to consider that doing another episode on that part. But I've kept you for a while already. So
Yes. Yeah.
so the last
We'll
thing
put
I
it on
would
the calendar.
yes. Yes. Okay. So you guys have heard it live. We're gonna bring Jocelyn back and we're gonna talk about dads too. Um, so just one last thing before we close out. If you could speak directly to a woman, there's some woman listening right now who is suffering the loss through a miscarriage of her daughter or her son. What would you say to her?
I have so much to say, but first I would just give you a big hug, um, and sit next to you. And I think the most comforting words that I could hold on to might seem a little strange, but they are that it won't always be this way. I think when you're in the deepest part of despair, I believed in God, but I wasn't sure he was good. And I knew that life was going to keep going, and I couldn't imagine how I could keep going like this in this dark place. Um, and so for me, it won't always be this way was a phrase that I could hold on to that has borne out to be true. That I was in a really dark place, that I was really hurting and really suffering. Um, but it's not that way now. And if all you can hold on to is the hope that it won't always be that way, sometimes that's enough just to get to the next day until eventually one day you wake up and it's not. And things are a lot brighter and God has restored your peace in your situation and you find a way to move forward.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for those. Those are powerful warrior words. And yeah, it won't always be this way. So thank you. Thank you for coming on and bravely sharing your story so that someone else may be able to see themselves and learn and grow and just get to that place of peace. So thank you.
Welcome. I really hope it is help to someone.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eden, Thomas, James, three beautiful babies. Their lives on earth were short, but impactful. In combination with their mother, Jocelyn, they inspired We Carry You Still. By talking about miscarriage, we can make it feel more acceptable to grieve, mourn, and remember these beautiful babies carried in the wombs of their mothers. If you have experienced a miscarriage, you are not alone. You are not a bad mother. By sharing your experience, by expressing your grief, you can begin to heal. By talking about your babies and sharing them with your family and friends, you carry them still and allow others the opportunity to grieve and then to heal. I love that Jocelyn gave each of her daughters the opportunity and the choice to spend time with their brother. In doing this, she honored all of them. And she continues to honor all of her children through the We Carry You Still ministry. Eden, Thomas, and James live on in the resources, education, and memory boxes available on their website. Whether you live in Arizona or not, I encourage you to visit the website and take advantage of the free resources Jocelyn has either created or vetted to help you or someone you love navigate the traumatic loss of a baby. We do not believe that God causes our trauma, but we do believe he uses it for good. Jocelyn experienced 3 very different miscarriages. She had to search for information and resources each time because each was so different. She had to battle misinformation and fight for her rights and the rights of her children. You have options. And while they may vary by state, you can be armed with the weapons of knowledge and the power of the Holy Spirit to make the best ones for you, your family, and your baby. It won't always be this way. While she was speaking to mothers experiencing the loss of their baby, I think Jocelyn's words are applicable to many traumas in our lives. Hold tight to her powerful warrior words. Something to think about this week. Until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.